In a tranquil suburban neighborhood, a gentle old dog was peacefully dozing in the sunshine of his backyard when two police officers arrived. What began as a routine check escalated into something unjust and distressing for the defenseless dog. Just as it seemed this senior pup had no one to defend him, his owner appeared, turning the confrontation on its head. How could a loyal elderly dog spark such upheaval, and what led these officers to cross the line? Mark Winters had spent nearly 12 years with his beloved German Shepherd mix, Duke, a grey-muzzled companion who adored warm afternoons snoozing by the garden fence. Their life in the quiet suburb seemed idyllic. Neighbors waved hello, and local kids rode bikes until dusk. But one fateful day, that peace was shattered. Duke, now considered elderly in dog years, typically spent his midday napping by a patch of sunlit grass. Mark had gone out for errands, expecting no surprises. He never imagined returning to find two police officers looming over his dog, voices raised, tension crackling in the air. A neighbor, hearing the commotion, peeked through a window. The sight shocked her, an old dog cowering near the fence while uniformed officers barked commands, brandishing authority disproportionate to the situation. Duke's only response was a low, pitiful whine, his tired eyes reflecting confusion and fear. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood, something's happening at Mark's house, the cops are hassling his old dog. Some feared Duke was being accused of aggression or nuisance, others worried about potential animal cruelty. By the time Mark's car pulled up, the situation appeared bleak. Duke cowered, pressed against the fence, trembling under the officer's stern gestures. What on earth had provoked this scene? According to a witness, the police had received an anonymous complaint about a dangerous dog roaming yards. Yet Duke's cloudy eyes and unsteady legs told a different story. He barely roamed more than a few feet from his food bowl these days. Mark's heart pounded with anger and protectiveness as he saw his old friend cornered. He stepped out of his car, adrenaline coursing through him, determined to defend Duke. The officers whirled around, eyes flicking wearily between man and dog, uncertain how Mark would respond. At that moment, the stage was set for a confrontation that would not only reveal the truth behind the call but also challenge assumptions about loyalty, authority, and the quiet strength of an old grey-muzzled dog who wanted nothing more than to snooze in the sun. Little did anyone suspect that what happened next would force everyone, neighbors, police, and even Mark himself, to re-evaluate the line between caution and harassment, and between fear and compassion. Mark Winters could hardly believe the scene before him. His sweet old dog, Duke, who spent most of his days lying under the sun, now stood trembling in his own backyard, confronted by two uniformed police officers. Their voices were loud, overly so, Mark thought, and the tension in the air was unmistakable. Duke's muzzle was frosted with gray, and his joints had grown stiff over the years. Menacing was the last word anyone would use to describe him, yet here he was, pressed against the fence as if cornered by a threat he didn't understand. The instant Mark stepped out of his car, the officers snapped their heads around, their eyes shifting wearily between him and Duke. With adrenaline still pounding in his veins, Mark hurried across the yard. "What's going on?" he demanded, striving to keep his voice calm despite the anger rising inside him. One officer, a tall, broad-shouldered man, responded curtly, "We got a call about a dangerous dog roaming yards in the neighborhood." He kept one hand near his utility belt, which made Mark's stomach twist with worry. The officer's partner, slightly shorter, glanced at Duke with clear unease. Mark shook his head, confusion evident on his face. Dangerous? He's old, he rarely even leaves this spot anymore. Duke let out a soft, pitiful whine, his paws scraping at the grass. This was not a dog lashing out or baring fangs. If anything, Duke was the one feeling harassed, facing two strangers in uniform who loomed over him in an aggressive posture. The entire image struck Mark as absurd and unsettling. Trying to defuse the situation, Mark approached Duke slowly. He crouched down, speaking in a soothing tone. "Hey, buddy, it's okay," he murmured, running a hand along Duke's back. He felt the old dog's heart thumping faster than usual. "Nobody's going to hurt you." The tall officer frowned. "Sir, please step back. We need to assess this dog. We were informed he might have snapped at someone." Mark's eyes narrowed. Snapped at who? He can barely stand on his hind legs most days. He caught sight of a neighbor, Mrs. Flanagan, peeking from behind her curtain. She made a sympathetic gesture, as though to say she'd seen enough to know Duke posed no threat. A flicker of doubt crossed the shorter officer's face. "We received a complaint from a neighbor about an aggressive dog barking and chasing kids." He hesitated, scanning Duke's shaky posture. Could it be a mix-up? Mark exhaled, frustration mounting. "It's definitely a mix-up." Duke's never chased anyone in his life, not even a squirrel these days. Maybe you got the wrong address." The tall officer stood firm, arms crossed. "We followed up on the call. The address matches. We also saw him free in the yard and responding aggressively when we arrived." "Responding aggressively?" Mark repeated, his voice sharp. "He's old and scared. You're strangers yelling at him in his own backyard." An uncomfortable silence fell. The taller officer seemed unwilling to concede a mistake, while his partner grew visibly uneasy, as though realizing the situation wasn't as reported. Mark stroked Duke's ears again, trying to calm the dog's trembling. "Are you two barged into private property on a bad tip?" Mark continued, forcing himself to keep steady. "Now you're doubling down instead of admitting you might have been wrong." The tall officer's jaw tightened. "Sir, lower your voice." His tone brimmed with authority, but underneath it, Mark sensed a hint of defensiveness. "We're just doing our job." "That's fine," Mark shot back, "but your job also involves recognizing when there's no real threat. Look at him." He gestured at Duke, whose rib cage rose and fell in quick, anxious bursts. A neighbor from across the fence chimed in, "Duke's been around forever. He's gentle as can be. How sure you're not mixing him up with that new big stray that's been around?" The officers glanced over, startled by the unexpected voice. Yet none of them could see the neighbor fully. He'd chosen to speak while partially hidden behind the fence, unwilling to get too involved but determined to defend Duke's reputation. Curiosity in a suburban neighborhood can spread like wildfire, and soon a small knot of onlookers gathered near Mark's property line. Some filmed the encounter on their phones, a few shouted opinions, "Leave that old dog alone," or "Police shouldn't harass harmless animals." The tension thickened with every passing moment. Duke, overwhelmed by the voices and stares, let out a low, mournful howl. Mark placed a reassuring hand on his dog's scruff, whispering, "Hang on, buddy. We'll fix this." The older officer seemed to bristle at the growing scrutiny. His posture stiffened, as though he feared losing control of the narrative. The shorter officer, noticing the shift in public sentiment, cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should verify the dog's documentation, sir," he suggested, attempting a calmer tone. "Proof of vaccination, licensing, they might help clarify things." Mark nodded, wanting to de-escalate. "Sure, let me grab his papers from inside." Then, with a pointed look at the tall officer, he added, "But Duke's staying right here with me. You don't need to handle him." The tall officer remained stoic but stepped back grudgingly, letting Mark guide Duke toward the back door. The pair moved slowly, Duke's joints creaked with age, each step an effort. Onlookers parted to let them pass, some murmuring gentle words to the dog, "Hang in there, old boy." Inside, Mark fetched Duke's vet records from a dusty folder. He felt his anger subsiding into sadness. The thought of Duke being harassed in his final years stung more than any personal insult. When he returned, the officers scanned the paperwork, verifying that Duke was fully vaccinated, microchipped, and licensed with the city. The shorter officer's eyes flicked sympathetically from the pages to Duke's trembling form. "Everything checks out," he admitted. Then he met his partner's gaze, as if inviting the taller officer to concede. With pursed lips, the tall officer nodded abruptly. "Looks like there was indeed a mistake." A hush fell over the yard. The crowd, phones still raised, watched for the final verdict. The tall officer exhaled a long breath, stepping forward. "We apologize for the confusion," he said stiffly, though sincerity peeked through his guarded tone. "We had a report of a dangerous dog. We reacted on that assumption." Mark managed a small nod. "I get you're doing your job. Just next time, maybe assess the situation better before scaring an old dog half to death." The officer's jaw worked, like he wanted to argue, but the presence of so many witnesses, plus the dog's obvious frailty, seemed to dampen his pride. "Understood." With that, the two officers turned, retreating from the backyard. A few neighbors muttered disapproval under their breath. Miss Flanagan clapped softly, a mocking gesture that made the departing officer stiffen but say nothing more. Once they were gone, Mark dropped to one knee beside Duke, relief sweeping over him like a tidal wave. The old shepherd mix let out a shaky exhale and pressed his muzzle into Mark's chest. Soft murmurs of encouragement rose from those still present. "Good boy, Duke. He's safe now." But Mark couldn't shake the image of the officers looming, voices raised. Had they not been called out by the neighbors, might this situation have escalated? In that moment, Mark resolved to protect Duke with renewed vigor. Age might have stolen some of the dog's mobility, but Duke deserved dignity and peace in his own yard. Whatever had triggered the erroneous complaint and the officer's overreaction, Mark vowed never to let it happen again. If the system needed clarity on what constituted a real threat, perhaps it was time to speak up on behalf of every gray-muzzled friend who just wanted to snooze in the sun without fear of intimidation. An unsettled quiet clung to the backyard after the officers departed. Some neighbors lingered at the fence, discussing the unsettling scene in hushed voices. Duke, still trembling slightly, pressed his muzzle against Mark's leg, as if seeking reassurance that the ordeal was indeed over. Mark bent down to rub the old shepherd's ears, feeling a wave of relief tempered by lingering anger. A wiry-haired woman in a beige coat, Mrs. Flanagan, stepped forward, concern etched into the lines of her face. "Mark, are you both okay?" she asked, her voice low. That was intense. Mark nodded, forcing a small, grateful smile. "We're fine now. Thanks for speaking up earlier." The neighbors' quick intervention had helped diffuse the officer's aggressive stance, though the memory of their harsh voices still made Mark's stomach twist. In the corner of the yard, Mr. Leonard, a longtime resident with a cane, shook his head. "Can't believe they thought Duke was a threat. Poor dog, all bones and arthritis." Hearing that only fueled Mark's sense of injustice. "I know. He's never hurt a soul. Someone must have exaggerated or outright lied when they called the cops." By the next morning, word of cops harassing an elderly dog had circulated through the neighborhood social media group. Posts described how the dog was cornered in his own yard, while many commented on how surprising it was that the police acted with such hostility toward a clearly non-threatening pet. Some were livid, demanding accountability from the department. Others speculated about who might have reported Duke as dangerous. Mark scrolled through these messages with conflicting emotions. He appreciated the support but dreaded any backlash that might come from stirring up official trouble. He also wondered if the complainant was a new resident or someone with a vendetta against dogs. Duke, meanwhile, dozed by the living room window, occasionally lifting his head to watch Mark pace. Though the immediate threat was gone, Mark found himself glancing out the window more often, alert to any sign of patrol cars. Duke, once carefree about wandering the backyard, seemed skittish. He stuck close to the house, as if afraid strangers might invade again. The dog's anxiety manifested in restless nights, pacing and whining near the back door. More than once, Mark had to get up at 2 a.m. to reassure Duke that nothing was lurking outside. The entire ordeal felt wrong on many levels, prompting Mark to consider whether he should file a complaint. He'd never been anti-police. In fact, he'd always respected law enforcement, but seeing officers treat his harmless old pet like a threat rattled him deeply. Could these same officers treat another unsuspecting animal the same way, or worse, an actual person? A few days later, Mark decided to pay a visit to the local precinct, hoping to talk things out or at least learn why the officers had responded in such a manner. When he arrived, the front desk officer listened to Mark's brief account, then disappeared to find a supervisor. 20 minutes later, Mark was led to a cramped office where a lieutenant with tired eyes and an apologetic smile awaited him. "Mr. Winters," the lieutenant began, "we've reviewed the call logs. There was an anonymous report of a dog fitting Duke's description, supposedly growling at kids. The responding officers were following standard procedure, but based on neighbor statements, it seems like a major miscommunication." Mark nodded, tension coiling in his chest. "I'm not trying to cause trouble, but they didn't just follow procedure. They escalated quickly, cornering an old dog and yelling at him. That's not standard." A flicker of regret crossed the lieutenant's face. "I understand. We're conducting an internal review." He paused, choosing words carefully. "It appears the call may have been exaggerated or possibly a prank. We are taking steps to address the officer's approach." Though not entirely satisfied, Mark sensed a bit of sincerity. "I appreciate that. My concern is Duke is traumatized. I don't want this happening to anyone else, pet or person." Meanwhile, some of the neighbors banded together to unearth who might have placed that misleading call. Mrs. Flanagan cornered Mark one afternoon, brandishing a printed map of their street. "I've asked around. None of the older residents said they phoned the police. A new family moved in 2 blocks over. Someone saw them complaining about dog barking last week. Could they be the ones?" It was speculation, but Mark felt a flicker of annoyance. If someone had overreacted to mild barking, especially an older dog's occasional groan or whine, that seemed extreme. "I guess it's possible," Mark replied. "But we can't assume. I just hope they realize the trouble they caused." Motivated by the fiasco, Mark began contemplating ways to ensure better understanding between local officers and pet owners. Perhaps the department could hold a small workshop on canine behavior, teaching officers how to distinguish between genuine aggression and a frightened or elderly dog. He discussed the idea with Mr. Leonard and Mrs. Flanagan, who both thought it might unify the community. Coincidentally, a local animal shelter staffer reached out online, offering Mark support. They shared stories of dogs wrongfully reported or seized due to misunderstandings, especially larger breeds. "Would love to feature Duke in a short piece about older dog care," the staffer wrote. "It might help people see seniors as gentle souls." Flattered but cautious, Mark agreed to a brief interview. As the week slipped by, Duke regained some confidence in the yard, though the dog still showed signs of skittishness whenever strangers passed by. Mark devoted time each afternoon to sit outside with Duke, letting him soak up the sun again, reassuring him with gentle pets and calm words. The small lines of worry in the dog's eyes gradually softened, replaced by his usual laid-back demeanor. Yet a sense of mission grew in Mark's heart. That day in the backyard had revealed the fragility of his dog's peace and, by extension, the precarious line between caution and overreach by authorities. If one anonymous complaint could spur officers to harass a harmless senior canine, what about cases involving less visible or less fortunate pets? Before this, Mark had been content to let life flow quietly. Now he considered a more proactive role, maybe advocating for clearer policies or simply sharing Duke's story with local media. He hoped that in doing so, fewer animals and fewer owners would face the same distress. At day's end, as he rubbed Duke's graying muzzle and watched the dog's tired eyes close in contentment, Mark understood that championing kindness and reason might be the best outcome of the entire ordeal. And in that gentle twilight hush, it seemed Duke agreed, one peaceful sigh at a time. Several weeks passed since the unsettling confrontation in Mark Winters's backyard. Duke, the elderly German Shepherd mix, had mostly recovered his confidence, no longer flinching each time he heard unfamiliar footsteps near the fence. Mark, on the other hand, remained uneasy. He tried to move forward, focusing on his work and the rhythms of daily life, yet a nagging curiosity about who had called the police in the first place kept gnawing at him. One crisp morning, Mark retrieved his mail and found a plain white envelope with no return address. Inside was a typed note, "I'm sorry for what happened. I never meant for the police to treat your dog so harshly. I just wanted help with a stray that's been scaring my kids. It's all gone too far. Please understand." His mind raced. Who wrote this? The simplest guess was that it was from the neighbor rumored to have placed the complaint. But if this person truly hadn't intended to target Duke specifically, how had everything escalated? Mark reread the note. The words felt both apologetic and defensive, hinting they still believed there was a legitimate concern about a stray. But it didn't clarify why the call had led police to his property or how the situation spun out of control. At least they're remorseful, he thought. Duke, sniffing the corner of the envelope, let out a soft huff, as if unimpressed. A few days later, Missy Flanagan stopped by while Mark was raking leaves in his front yard. "I heard from the Jones family down the road," she remarked. "They said they saw a large, manger-looking stray prowling around the alley last night. Could that be the dog your neighbor mentioned? Maybe that's who the police were really looking for." Mark paused, leaning on the rake. If so, it means the call might have been genuine. The caller must have confused Duke with that stray. But why didn't they at least verify it before barging into my yard? Mrs. Flanagan shrugged, sharing his frustration. Either way, there's definitely another dog out there, and it's probably not old and gentle like Duke. That evening, Mark found himself sitting on the back porch, pondering the idea of a stray that might indeed be aggressive. If a large dog was roaming and scaring kids, he empathized with the concerned parent. Duke snored softly at his feet, oblivious to the swirl of emotions in Mark's mind. If only we could have sorted this out calmly, Mark thought. Instead, a simple complaint had escalated into a near tragedy for his old friend. Just then, a sound from beyond his fence, a muffled growl or bark, caught his attention. Duke's ears twitched, but he didn't stir otherwise. Rising to investigate, Mark peered over the fence. In the dim glow of a nearby street lamp, he glimpsed a lean, shadowy canine shape slipping behind a trash bin. The dog, if it was indeed a stray, disappeared almost instantly when it sensed Mark's presence. The next morning, Mark paid a visit to the local animal shelter, determined to learn more about the rumored stray. A volunteer there, a young man named Peter, recognized Mark's face from the local social media chatter about Duke's ordeal. "We've had a few calls about a large, possibly aggressive stray matching that description," Peter said. "He's known to roam the alleys at night. Folks have seen him near your block, scavenging from trash cans." Mark's thoughts turned back to the typed letter. Perhaps it truly was just a case of mistaken identity. The neighbor, frightened for their children, called the police. The cops showed up, found an old shepherd in a yard, and jumped to conclusions, a tragic miscommunication. He mused inwardly, relieved that no malicious intent seemed to target Duke specifically. But it also filled him with sympathy for whoever wrote that letter. Fear can make people act rashly. Back at home, Mark emailed an update to a small group of neighbors who'd been discussing the issue. He suggested they coordinate, keep an eye out for the stray, and maybe reach out to local rescue groups so the dog could be caught humanely and rehomed instead of feared or shot by alarmed residents. To Mark's surprise, within a couple of hours, his inbox flooded with supportive replies. Miss Flanagan wrote, "Count me in. If we can set up a humane trap or even just feed it in a safe spot, we can help it." Another neighbor, Mr. Leonard, offered to set up a motion-activated camera near his trash cans. The community seemed eager to avoid another fiasco. Meanwhile, Peter from the shelter reached out with a discovery. A dog matching the stray's description had been reported missing by a family in a neighboring town months ago. He emailed a grainy photo, indeed, a large shepherd mix with ragged fur and anxious eyes. This dog's name was apparently Scout, once belonging to a single mother who had to relocate for work. The dog escaped a boarding arrangement and vanished. The mother, desperate, had posted flyers. No one seemed to notice that same day. Mark showed the photo to Mrs. Flanagan and a few others. They nodded emphatically. It looked just like the animal rummaging through their alleys. Could Scout have ended up in their suburb by chance, living off garbage? The idea tugged at Mark's conscience. We can help the dog instead of labeling him dangerous. The neighbor's fear might be real, but it doesn't mean lethal force is the answer. That afternoon, a knock on Mark's door jolted him from his thoughts. Opening it, he found himself face to face with one of the officers who had confronted Duke, not the tall, stern one, but the shorter officer who seemed more hesitant that day. The man looked uneasy but determined. "I want to apologize properly," the officer said, removing his cap. "We got the call about a dangerous dog, but I realize we overreacted in your yard. That was never our intention. Sometimes we respond to a perceived threat too aggressively." Though Mark's anger simmered, he appreciated the attempt at a genuine apology. He invited the officer in for a brief conversation, offering coffee while Duke observed from his spot on the rug. The officer confessed that the police department had been on high alert for roaming aggressive dogs after a recent incident in another district. "We jumped to conclusions," he admitted, glancing at Duke. "I'm truly sorry." After a pause, Mark shared the rumor of the real stray dog, Scout, and the plan to capture him safely. The officer's eyes brightened with interest. "I can put you in touch with animal control. Maybe we can set up a safe trap. We don't want to see any dog get hurt." They talked well into the evening, forging a new understanding. Where once Mark felt only resentment, he now saw an officer who regretted mistakes and was willing to help correct them. As the officer left, Duke watched from the door, tail wagging gently, as if sensing the tension had softened. That night, Mark sat in the backyard again, gazing at the star-flecked sky. Duke lay by his feet, muzzle resting on Mark's shoe. The typed letter, the rumored stray, the supportive neighbors, and now the apologetic officer, everything pointed to a chance for real change, at least in this corner of the suburb. A chance for compassion to triumph over fear, for cooperation to replace aggression. He'd see how it all played out in the coming days. But for now, he scratched Duke's ears, feeling the old dog sigh contentedly, and allowed himself a bit of hope. Perhaps the biggest revelation was that when faced with misunderstanding and fear, people could still choose decency, bridging the gap between anxious callers, cautious police, and a community that loved its pets. Duke, half asleep, snored softly, maybe dreaming of a world where no old dog would ever again be harassed in his own backyard. Morning light spilled across Mark Winters's living room floor, illuminating Duke sprawled out in a patch of warmth. The elderly shepherd mix slept soundly, his legs twitching as if chasing a dream squirrel. For the first time in weeks, Mark felt a faint optimism that maybe their quiet life could return to normal, only this time with a renewed sense of purpose and neighborly collaboration. Following the apology from the police officer and the revelation of the stray dog's true identity, Scout, Mark found himself at the heart of a blossoming neighborhood initiative. A small group of residents, Miss Flanagan, Mr. Leonard, and a few others, convened in Mark's backyard for an informal town hall of sorts. Over folding chairs and lukewarm lemonade, they plotted ways to safely capture Scout before he got into more trouble. "I spoke to a rescue group," Miss Flanagan announced, waving her phone excitedly. "They're willing to lend us a humane dog trap if we can lure him with food. They'll come pick him up and foster him until the owner from that other town can be contacted. Mr. Leonard, leaning on his cane, nodded. We also have the officer who confronted Duke offering to help, a surprising turn of events, but I guess he feels bad. He shot Mark a meaningful look. Glad to see some good come out of that fiasco. Mark ran a hand through his hair, glancing down at Duke, who gazed sleepily at the group as if to ask, "Are we having another crisis?" "Yeah," Mark said. "If it means no more dogs get misidentified and harassed, I'm in." Deep down, he hoped capturing Scout might also bring closure to the confusion that had nearly cost Duke his peace. The next day, Mark received a call from that same apologetic officer, Officer Reed, who had realized the misunderstanding about Duke. "We got word from Animal Control. They'd like us to assist setting up the trap near your block in case Scout's still lurking." His tone was professional yet tinged with a personal note, like he felt he owed Mark a proper resolution. Mark agreed, though he couldn't help but recall how only recently he bristled at the mere sight of a patrol car near his yard. Now, ironically, these same officers would stand guard for a dog in need. The shift in dynamic wasn't lost on him. That evening, a small crew gathered behind Mark's backyard fence, where sightings of Scout had been reported. They erected a large humane trap, a metal enclosure with a drop door that would seal once the dog stepped inside. Miss Flanagan contributed leftover roast chicken, setting it on a paper plate as bait. One of the rescue volunteers explained, "He's likely hungry and suspicious of people. We need him to enter willingly, then we can safely transport him." Duke kept at a distance, watching with mild confusion. Maybe he sensed they were doing something dog-related, but couldn't quite figure out what. Mark patted Duke's head. "Don't worry, bud. We're making sure no one mistakes another dog for you again." Officer Reed stood by, occasionally shining a flashlight along the alley. "If we can't catch him tonight, we'll try again tomorrow. But from what we've heard, he tends to patrol these trash cans after midnight." As the sun dropped, volunteers took shifts, peering out windows or huddling near the trap. Mark even rigged a spare camera to monitor the site from his phone. The quiet suburb at night felt strangely unified by this mission, reminiscent of simpler times when neighbors collectively protected their own. Sure enough, around 11 p.m., Mark's phone pinged with a motion alert from the camera feed. Scout, a lean silhouette in the alley, crept toward the bait. Heart pounding, Mark rushed outside, meeting Miss Flanagan and Reed behind the fence. They watched from a respectful distance as the dog sniffed the air, obviously ravenous yet cautious. Slowly, the stray inched forward, muzzle low, ears twitching at every faint sound. For a moment, it seemed he'd entered the trap, but then a distant car door slammed. Scout bolted, vanishing into the darkness before the drop door triggered. Reed let out a frustrated sigh, and Miss Flanagan shook her head. "He's spooked. We'll try again tomorrow or the next night," she murmured. They dismantled the bait, leaving the trap in place with fresh food. Sometimes capturing a weary stray could take days or even weeks. The following afternoon, Mark received a call from the woman who'd posted about a missing dog named Scout. She introduced herself as Linda from a nearby town. "I heard your group is trying to catch a big shepherd mix. Could it be my Scout? He escaped months ago." Her voice brimmed with both hope and worry. Mark described the sightings and the approximate size and coat color. Linda nearly cried with relief. "Sure, it's her dog. He's probably terrified. He was always skittish around strangers, especially men. Please, I'll come help. Just tell me where and when." Mark arranged for Linda to drive over that night. If Scout recognizes her scent, maybe the stray won't flee. That evening, as neighbors set up once again, Linda arrived in a dented sedan, carrying an old blanket Scout used to sleep on. The plan was simple: line the trap with the blanket so Scout might feel secure. The tension was palpable. Would tonight be the night they finally helped the poor stray? Mark felt a familiar anxiety pinch his gut as the group reassembled. Duke dozed inside the house, spared from another night of watches and potential confrontation. Officer Reed, off duty now, showed up in civilian clothes, wanting to see it through. They took up positions again, cameras rolling, hearts pounding. Shortly before midnight, a rustling in the brush announced Scout's approach. Linda crouched behind a trash bin, her breath quivering. The dog emerged, coat ragged, eyes gleaming with caution. As soon as Scout sniffed the blanket scent, his posture shifted from alarm to uncertain curiosity. A hush fell among the watchers, careful not to make sudden moves. Linda gently called, "Scout, boy? Is that you?" Her voice was thick with emotion. The dog froze, ears perked. Then, in a breath-catching moment, Scout took a trembling step forward, another, and another. He nosed the blanket, tail twitching in confusion but also recognition. A whimper escaped him, low and heartbreakingly vulnerable. Linda, tears slipping down her cheeks, inched forward, letting Scout catch her scent fully. Then the stray, no longer a stranger, mustered enough trust to step closer. The watchers held their breath. Slowly, Linda reached out, hand trembling, and Scout licked her palm. A hush of awe rolled through the group. Under the faint moonlight, the dog at last allowed himself to be gently coaxed into the open cage. The drop door slid down with a click, but this time it wasn't the sound of entrapment, it was the signal that Scout was finally safe. Linda sobbed softly, pressing her hand through the bars to stroke his matted fur. Even Officer Reed stood by with misty eyes. In that moment, Mark realized the direct link between Duke's ordeal and Scout's rescue. If not for the misguided call that nearly spelled trouble for Duke, the neighborhood might never have banded together to save the real stray. Fate, in its odd, indirect way, had steered them here. Mark exhaled, a wave of relief and gratitude rising in him. Duke's innocence had been proven, and another dog, frightened and misunderstood, would now find his way back to a loving home. The capture of Scout brought a welcome calm to the neighborhood. People who had anxiously peered outside each night for the lurking stray could finally leave scraps of trash or let their pets roam the yard without fear. Even so, the story was not over. Word of how Duke had been mistaken for a dangerous dog and how a genuine stray named Scout was eventually found was spreading through local media circles. Neighbors who'd once never spoken were now chatting over fences, sharing updates on both dogs. The day after Scout was caught, Linda, the dog's former owner, came to pick him up from the local rescue. A small crowd of neighbors and volunteers gathered in the rescue center's lobby, watching as Linda approached the exhausted, timid shepherd mix. She crouched low, calling his name softly. There was an audible gasp when Scout recognized her scent, tail giving a hesitant wag. Tears glistened in Linda's eyes as she thanked Mark and the others who had worked to ensure Scout's safety instead of letting him roam until something worse happened. "I was desperate when I lost him," she confided. "I never imagined he'd travel all the way here and cause so much trouble by accident." Mark shook her hand warmly. "There's no trouble. I'm just glad we figured it out before the police or someone else made a mistake." He thought of Duke, trembling in the backyard, and how close the entire incident had come to ending in tragedy. As Mark guided Linda through the rescue center, Detective Reed, the officer who'd apologized, stepped in to observe. He'd been assigned to follow up on the final details of the stray dog's case. Seeing Linda and Scout's tearful reunion, his gaze softened. To Mary, it was clear that Reed wasn't the callous enforcer some might have painted him as during the backyard confrontation. He'd simply been doing his job, albeit too aggressively at first. "It feels good to see a happy ending," Reed muttered, almost to himself. Mark caught the remark and offered a nod. "Better than cornering an old dog who did nothing wrong," he said gently, not to dredge up blame but to underline how far they'd come. Reed grimaced, returning a small smile. "I won't forget that day," he admitted. "I guess we all learned something." Duke, for his part, had become something of a local celebrity. The story of how an elderly dog got mixed up in a police fiasco and how it led to saving a real stray had been picked up by a regional TV station. One afternoon, a reporter showed up at Mark's front door, cameraman in tow, politely asking for an interview. Mark hesitated, uncertain if he wanted the attention, but then he glanced at Duke, snoozing contentedly, and realized that shining a light on the issues, misidentifications, the risk of overzealous responses, might help others avoid similar incidents. During the brief interview, Mark found himself explaining how close Duke was to being hurt by scared or aggressive officers simply because of a call that never specified the correct dog. He stressed the importance of verifying complaints and treating animals and their owners with empathy before escalating a situation. When asked what he hoped would change, Mark simply said, "I'd like folks to ask questions first and let fear take a backseat." Shortly after, Captain Ellis from the local police station reached out to Mark. He wanted to create a small training module for officers that included basic K9 body language and recommended steps to follow up on dog-related calls. "We can't rely solely on outdated protocols," Ellis said during a phone call. "Your story with Duke put a spotlight on how easy it is to make assumptions." Mark welcomed the idea. "If you need me or Duke's help, let me know." He pictured Duke standing in a station briefing room, old tail wagging, as officers learned how to read a dog's posture or interpret a whine versus a growl. The mental image warmed his heart, a small step toward ensuring no other docile pet ended up cornered and terrified. Detective Reed also seemed keen on this. He privately confided to Mark, I'd feel better if the next time we respond to a dog complaint, we use a calmer approach. No one wants a tragedy on their conscience. As a gesture of unity, Misty Flanagan organized a weekend neighborhood potluck in Mark's backyard. Yes, the same place where Duke's ordeal began. The vibe was markedly different now. The fence was decorated with ribbons, a picnic table overflowed with home-cooked dishes, and children played tag while the older folks sipped iced tea. Even Officer Reed dropped by, off-duty, to say hello. Duke lay on a blanket near the porch, contentedly soaking in the social bustle. Whenever someone new arrived, they'd kneel down and offer gentle pats or ear scratches. Among them was Linda, who came with Scout in tow, kept on a leash but much calmer than before. The two dogs sniffed each other politely. Duke offered a low woof, as if welcoming the younger dog into his domain. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the yard, Mark surveyed the mingling crowd, neighbors chatting, children giggling, two dogs, one old, one once lost, both lying peacefully under the same sky. The irony was not lost on him. An era so frustrating had led them all to a deeper sense of community. Without that complaint, they might never have banded together to rescue Scout nor spurred the police to rethink how they handle